Yeah, hello. I'm Andrew Cowan. I'm one of the directors of Creative Writing at UEA, and I teach on the MA program. And I'm going to be talking about writing to three former students of the MA program who are sitting on the sitting things for sitting on, just here. I've just been told that it's St. Patrick's Day, which I didn't know, and I'm inadvertently colour-coded for St. Patrick's Day. You can't see too hot. You can't see my socks, which are orange, but my chair is orange. The kind of questions I want to ask of the three writers are the kind of questions that I always wish would be asked at events like this, but which sophisticated readers like us shouldn't ask or are too embarrassed to ask. So I think a dignified way of describing them is that they're process questions, Paris Review type questions. A less dignified way of describing them is what did you eat for breakfast type questions. One of the things that comes with the territory of being a published writer is that you have to hand a potted biog, which will do for all purposes. So I asked Joe, Naomi, and Emma to send me theirs. So by way of introduction, here are their potted biogs. Joe Dunthorne was born and brought up in Swansea. His debut novel, Submarine, was translated into 16 languages and adapted for film by Richard Ayoade. His second novel, Wild Abandon, won the Encore Award in 2012. A pamphlet of his poems was published by Faber and Faber a year before that, in 2011, 2010, maybe? Came in the middle. Anyway,
I'm trying not to listen to.
Joe's also a poet. He published poems with Faber and Faber. He graduated from the BA in English Literature with Creative Writing at UEA in 2004. I actually met him as a writing fellow before I was on the staff there. So we first met in about 2002 or 3. And I think I saw an early piece of Submarine then. He graduated from the MA in Creative Writing in 2005, and I taught him in 2005, the spring semester. And I remember those workshops as being some of the easiest workshops I've ever had to do. It was a little bit like tuning into a monthly serial where you got installations. You got the latest bit of Submarine, installments. We read Submarine in installments in our workshop. There was very little criticism going on. We were just enjoying it. So Joe graduated in 2005. Naomi Wood is the author of The Godless Boys, which was published in 2011, and Mrs. Hemmingway. Mrs. Hemmingway has been translated into 10 languages, won the Jerwood Fiction Prize, and was shortlisted for the 2015 International Dylan Thomas Prize. It was also a Richard and Judy Book Club choice. She lives in London and teaches creative writing at Goldsmiths College. Naomi graduated from the MA in 2008 and then from the PhD in creative and critical writing at UEA in 2013. And I read Naomi's application, in fact, to come on to the MA in 2006 and interviewed her. And I still remember what I wrote on her application, and I won't embarrass her.
No, I remember it was like...
That was one of
That's how the application went.
Statement sounds a bit cocky, I think. Is
Yeah,
what I wrote.
that was it.
Yeah,
Statement sounds a bit cocky.
We invited Naomi to take a year out, and she went to Paris and started writing what became the Godless Boys. Emma Healey grew up in London, where she completed her first degree in bookbinding, learning how to put books together, but not how to write them. She then worked in 2 libraries, 2 bookshops, 2 art galleries, and 2 universities before coming to UEA and settling in Norwich. Her first novel, Elizabeth is Missing, was published in 2014 and became a Sunday Times bestseller and won the Costa First Novel Award. It's also been translated into 27 languages. She graduated from the MA in Creative Writing in 2011. And I remember interviewing Emma in 2010. And actually, I want to begin the questions with a variation on the Can Writing Be Taught question, which is for each of you, surely you would have wrote your books and got published and would have been successful without coming on a creative writing course. And I want to ask Emma first, because your application to UEA included the first 2 chapters of what became Elizabeth is Missing. It was then entitled Maud. I reread the application the other day and compared it with the eventual novel, and quite a lot of it was the same. Those 2 chapters were a sample from 40,000 words you'd already written. That book would have happened without coming on a creative writing course.
I don't know. I mean, we were just saying the first 30 to 40,000 words is the easy bit, and then you sort of start to lose your way, and it starts to be difficult, and you suddenly think, is this the right idea? And all the things that the kind of way you imagine this book suddenly starts to get further and further away, and this lovely, perfect idea, you've ruined it already. And so I feel like actually that's the bit that I needed someone to want to read on and to tell me not where it's going wrong, but kind of say, well, think about this and think about another way of looking at it, and look at somebody else's work and see how they're struggling and they're getting around it. And so actually, yeah, it sounds like I had a huge amount of it, but really that was the very, 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 very beginning. So yeah, there's like a few sentences that are the same, or like even the same territory, but the book would probably never have been finished if I hadn't done the MA, and it definitely wouldn't have been as coherent. So yeah.
You worked on it throughout the year, and then you continued to work on it for 2 years or 3 years?
So it's about a year and a half maybe after I'd finished the course, yeah. I mean, I worked on a few other things during the MA, but mostly it was, I mean, if you're obsessed with your novel, you can't really, you can try and work on other stuff, but it's really difficult.
Is there a sense in which you do an MA and either it offers a sense of affirmation and you think, I am really a writer, I will therefore finish it, or it places this burden on you of proving your legitimacy as a writer? I better finish this, I've got an MA in creative writing.
I feel like I'm more the first one. Not that I kind of came out of it and thought oh, I'm obviously brilliant because I've done this MA, but I guess you have all these friends who are writers, and suddenly it feels like it's a respectable thing to be doing. Definitely before I started the MA, I was too embarrassed to tell people I was writing fiction. It was like this horrible, dirty little secret. And then you go on a course, and for me there were 21 other people who were all admitting to writing fiction, and so that seems okay. And you can write it in the open, and that's very helpful. So yeah, I think it's more about that than feeling like a burden. Yeah, and
So
hopefully by then you've got all the tools, or at least you've learnt some of the tools that you need.
And you've also lifted the burden of shame.
yeah, exactly.
Joe, we did look at Submarine whilst you were still on the BA.
Yeah, right at the end.
Right at the end of your BA, you'd begun to write what would become your first novel.
Yeah.
So again, you didn't really need the MA.
Where are you going with
it? Why have you set us up as trying to prove that your job is worthwhile?
That's your job.
I want an excuse to leave.
It was, you're talking about the installments thing. It was that sense of being under, a reasonable amount of pressure to produce something that a group of people who you respected would have to read, and just that structure. I mean, I might have written it eventually. It probably would have taken a lot longer. It probably would have been a bit worse. I might have got there, but having that sense of, I want to, in a competitive way, I want to prove myself in front of these people I like, whatever it is, 2 or 3 times a term, was a great structure. And I still had to do work afterwards, but to come away from that year with the bulk of it, and to know that it had gone over, it had been in front of so many people's eyes, I guess you just feel, it takes some of the anxiety away. But like you were saying, you just feel, okay, I can get on with this without that. Am I a writer? Why am I doing this question being so prominent?
Yeah, you mentioned competition.
Mm.
That's another sort of dirty little secret, I think, of people who write, that they do always feel themselves to be in competition with other writers. And the creative writing setup puts you in a kind of competitive environment. It's supposed to be supportive.
But, well, I think it is supportive, but have you seen that there's a film that was partly about creative writing called Wonder Boys, and it made me think, it's an American creative writing course, and they're just, obviously it's a film, but they're just so brutal to each other, and that was my expectation for the course. And in fact, although probably we maybe gossiped about behind each other's backs, in the class it was generally supportive. I would say we weren't honest most of the time, and we pulled a lot of punches. So actually, for most part, it was just a supportive atmosphere. The competition is all subconscious.
Hidden. Wouldn't you have written The Godless Boys in your garret in Paris, whether or not you'd come to UEA?
Well, I was a very cocky person back then. I think the creative writing, as a teacher of creative writing as well, I think the major thing it does, very simply, is it teaches you not to reinvent the wheel. So there's just a few rules, or which can be broken, but that if you adhere to, your writing is going to be lifted up. And there's some technique things and some craft things, which I think if you get right, which I think I was getting wrong in some circumstances, and just discussing those and having that bedrock, that foundation, I think that cut out a few years of writing for me, like a few years of experimenting with all these things and then working out, if you change perspective in the middle of the scene, it's going to be incredibly vertiginous and the reader's not going to be able to keep up. So I think it is very helpful in terms of those basic things. Yeah, I think I probably would have written it because, hey. And it still took me 2 years after leaving UEA. It took me 4 years to write that book. There was the competitive element, which I kind of enjoyed, that we were learning from each other and being around each other. Socially, it was just a great time, though, as well. Like, we had an enormous amount of fun and, pretending to be writers and sort of drinking a lot and partying a lot and going to these workshops. It was such an incredible sense of community. I kind of didn't care what the workshops were like because I was just having such a great time. And I would love to do that year again. I think being in Norwich where everything's super cheap and you can live super cheaply and you can cycle everywhere and you can, fall out of the wrong people's beds at the wrong type of hour. It's just great fun. I'd kill to go back to that year.
I do remember your year group.
Yeah.
I was in those pubs.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember. You went to Paris, so you had an interview, didn't you? And we offered
you said no, remember?
We said, yes, we would love you to come on the course,
yeah.
but we don't feel you're quite ready yet.
Yes.
Come back in a year. And you went to Paris?
Yeah, so I quit my job. I was working at Random House in the editorial department, and you said, we'd like you to take a year out to live and write. And I thought, I must take this man seriously. So I quit my job.
You're the first and only person who ever did.
Well, I was so glad I did.
Bless you.
And my friend was living in Paris, and she was doing a stage, and I said, okay, I'll just come to Paris. And I worked as an au pair, and I took the kids to school, and then I picked them up in the afternoon. So essentially I was a kind of like fake mom and wrote in between those hours, 10 and 3.
See, it makes sense to me if you'd gone to Paris and started to write Mrs. Hemmingway.
Yeah, instead
but
I
you
wrote
went to
about
Paris and you wrote
fake Scottish island.
A fake Scottish island in a sort of counterfactual dystopia, 1986, and England as a theocracy.
Yeah, but Mrs. Hemmingway's too much of a big project for my skill at that point. I think I had to write the first book and graduate from working out what the hell I was trying to do, because it was such a I just didn't know how to write a novel, and I was confused by the kind of vectors of how you put everything together. And it took me 4 years to work out how to do that. And only then, I think, was I ready to take on a biographical, historical project.
I mean, my next question is, where do you get your ideas? Where did you get the idea for the Godless Boys whilst in Paris?
It was a Lucian Freud painting called The Village Boys, which I saw, and I was flailing about for inspiration, and I'd been to a creative writing course in London, and we used lots of postcards and paintings and things like that, and she said, if you ever need inspiration, just start writing about a painting. And I just started writing about these three boys in the portrait.
Joe, where do you get your ideas?
Andrew told us he was going to ask us this question in advance, so I've had time to put it into percentages. I think roughly about 30% is my own life, maybe another 30% of my friends' lives, another 30% is stolen from books I've read, and then another 10% is maybe just starting to write with no intention and hoping something comes out.
How much?
An exercise that I might have learnt at UEA.
So you start, how much of the writing process actually generates the book?
That's a good question. I think it depends from book to book. It depends how much raw material you've got when you go into it. Like the book I'm writing at the moment has some true raw material at the heart of it, but since that chapter I've basically been running on generating from that original true thing. So it's probably, to use more percentages, say 80% made up, and the rest is, I can see, in the other 20% I can see where it's come from, even if it has been hopefully disguised.
There's one of my favourite writer's quotes is E.L. Doctorow, and it's every writer's dirty little secret that language precedes the intentions. We write in order to find out what it is we're writing. Do you have this sense when you're writing, the writing itself is showing you where to go? I'm looking at both of you simultaneously, just to completely confuse you. Emma?
Yes, I suppose so. I think I definitely feel that when I'm writing dialogue. So that's something that I try to start with, because it's usually my best way to get into a character and a space. And I don't necessarily know where that conversation is going to go, but as soon as there's two people speaking to each other, and you have to keep going, because you can't just have someone not answering a question or not going back to them. So it kind of forces me to keep going and putting one thing after another, and then usually they do sort of start to be in a space, start to be actual people. Quite often there's like one character who I know, and then I don't quite know who they're talking to yet, and that sort of makes itself clearer. So yeah, for dialogue it's definitely true, but I don't really like writing without knowing roughly where I might be going.
I think you've been interviewed an awful lot in the last couple of years since Elizabeth Smithson came out, and you get asked a lot, I think, about where the idea for this book came from, and you talk about your grandmother having Alzheimer's, and that gives us Maud in the book, aged 81 or 2. Where does Maud, age 15, 16 come from? Where does the Sookies storyline come from?
That was partly suggested by the book, so I guess that is like something where I had written some of Maud as an 81-year-old, 82-year-old, and then I knew that there had to be this other strand. So something that happens when people have dementia is they have this repeated pattern of behaviour, and so if she was going to be obsessed with an investigation in the present, there had to be one in the past, so I knew there was going to be a past story. But really the voice and the kind of character and some of the things that happened came from my other grandmother, who didn't have dementia, but she died just before I started writing, and I had to go and see her when she was dying, and I had this horrible trip down to Bournemouth where she lived, and I had 2 hours on the train, and I knew I was going to say goodbye, and I couldn't concentrate on anything, I couldn't read, and so I thought, okay, I'm going to write down every story I can remember her telling me about her early life. And when we got to the hospital, I went through those stories with her, and she was a great storyteller anyway, and was like there was a fun thing to do with her to reminisce, and I wanted to fact check and make sure I'd got the names right and things like that. But then I also wanted to prove to her that I had been listening to all those stories, because I think sometimes it seems like a granddaughter isn't listening to her grandmother, and I wanted to say these meant something. And then I was left with all these things, these like amazing stories from her. And although I didn't really use them in the end, it gave me that confidence to depict someone else's time and have this other voice. And so that kind of slotted in and felt almost like, not quite an homage, but that kind of feeling that I knew this person. So that's why the book is dedicated to both grandmothers, because they both had this role to play.
Yeah, it sort of leads into a question which was going to come later. I'll ask it now, which is about the importance of research. Did you do lots of diligent library research into the nature of life immediately post-war in the UK? And did you use it?
Yeah, I did a lot of research. Some of it was just reading diaries and seeing what people were talking about and that kind of thing. Some of it I'd used. Some things were just like weird little bits that you think actually there's like an image that I've sort of used in the present, and I realised that it's sort of relevant in the past as well, and that kind of brings this nice thread you can pull through, and that's really fun. Some of it was just to make sure I didn't make mistakes. I spent easily 2 days trying to find a reference for oven gloves in 1946. I couldn't.
Did they have them?
Well, no. I think they had them in America, but they were quite new, and they obviously hadn't made it to post-war Britain. So in the book they use rags, like that's what people did. But it's amazing how you just like, I mean, how much time I wasted just looking for oven gloves.
Research is a wonderful way of convincing yourself you're a writer,
Yes.
and excusing yourself from having to do any writing.
Well, actually, I had lunch with Andrew not that long ago, and he said, "Oh, are you writing?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm doing loads of research." And he said, "Well, that's circling your writing, isn't it?" So that told me I went home and actually did some work.
Naomi, you were actually a British Library Fellow, weren't you? You were
Yeah.
inaugural Eccles
Yeah.
Fellow, Writer-in-Residence?
Yeah.
Which is a sort of research
Your
position.
fellowship, yeah. I've had a sort of perhaps awakening, I think, in terms of working out what genre I want to be in. And I realised that I feel perhaps I have a sense of shame about being a novelist, so I can cloak it as a like pseudo-historian doing a lot of research into real people, doing a sort of biographical take on a novel. So that's Mrs. Hemmingway. I spent 2 years researching, well 3 really, because I was researching at the same time as writing. And I probably did too much research for that book, and I'm researching right now in another like crazy amount of detail. But I've just decided that this is what I like to do. I like to do heavy research projects. And usually you get to do really great traveling with the book, and you get to go to like nice libraries. And if you have a kind of historical bent to your novel, you usually can get other people to pay for you to go to these places. So yeah, I got this Eccles Fellowship at the British Library, looking at their American archives into Ernest Hemingway. And they didn't seem to care too much that I was writing a fictional novel, a novel, rather than a historical treatise on Hemingway's wives.
So Emma uses research as an excuse for not writing, and you use research as an excuse for holidays.
No, I use research as an excuse to kind of, I don't know, it's almost like my mum and dad are in my head, and I'm like, I'm a serious person because I'm researching things, I'm not just making things up. And my mum and dad in my head go, well done. And I feel like then they kind of pat me on the back, and it's a kind of way to fudge being a writer.
But doesn't the success of Mrs. Hemingway, and I don't just mean its public success and the translations and so on, but as a work of art, which it is, doesn't that reassure you that you don't need to do?
No.
So you do
But
all,
maybe because I'm very anxious.
still.
Yeah, I don't know if that ever leaves me. I just don't. I think I like having that bit of kind of. Well, I find it very interesting. I want to know all about a historical period, and I am doing that again. And I think I love doing it. And also, yeah, genuinely, I go to the library and I read books and I do a bit of writing that day, but for 4 hours I'll read all about this thing and then I can go and I can talk about it quite authoritatively. And yeah, it's a pleasure, but I think, yeah, privately, I think it comes out of some nervousness about not feeling quite confident enough just as a writer, perhaps.
Yeah, I wasn't going to ask this question. It didn't even occur to me, but some people view writing as a sort of therapeutic thing. Other people view writing as actually the cause of their neurosis rather than the cure for it. You would be the latter?
Yes.
That writing actually generates anxiety, it doesn't?
I don't know, maybe that's different for everybody. It's a difficult world to be in and maybe that's why I like the historical element of the research as well, because you're in a kind of real world, and in your book you're just in this imagined world, and you think people are going to judge you on the basis of this imagined world, and you'll spend a lot of time on your own, and I think it can, I think it's difficult. But since having a baby last year, and I was just telling Joe this, now my time is so pressurized and it's so squeezed. Writing Mrs. Hemmingway was really difficult and a really big challenge, and I wasn't quite sure how much I enjoyed of it. And now I'm writing, and I've got 5 hours a day to do it. So I drop her off at 10, and then I whiz to the library, and I've got to leave at 2:30, and I'm like a woman possessed, and it is a great pleasure, and that's something that hasn't happened for a while. I'm kind of writing this book, and I'm researching it, and I'm thinking, this is bloody great. This is fun because I'm not hanging out with my child. Great mother of the year. But it's suddenly bloomed again, the pleasure of writing, because it's a life of the mind that I had missed so much for 6 months. That suddenly, it's become just deeply pleasurable again. It's very nice.
Joe, do you find writing pleasurable or the cause of it?
I was just thinking about this today, that basically I plotted it on a graph. So like I wake up, try and wake up early-ish, and then I have a cup of strong tea, and then for like maybe 20 minutes, I just think I'm the most amazing writer. I just think I'm just an unparalleled genius. And then, as the day goes on, I think I'm okay, I'm pretty good maybe, and then like basically sometime during lunch, while I'm eating my lunch, I probably have an accurate idea of what kind of writer I am, but I'm not reading my book then, so it's irrelevant. And then throughout the afternoon, I learn to really, really hate what I've written, and I think I'm just a useless dogshit loser. And that's the time when I edit, because I go back to what I've written in the morning when I thought I was a genius. I'm just like, this is just embarrassing, and then you take out all the bad things. So it feels like that's probably a reasonably normal...
Yeah. That's described my day.
Yeah. It doesn't feel that unusual. So it's just a weird thing that you never feel like you know what kind of writer you are. You're always in these weird mood swings and flipping between anxiety and exhilaration.
Yeah. I either think I'm going to win the Booker Prize or that I should just burn it right now. Like, two extremes.
So I think it's like 1:22 p.m. with a sandwich in your mouth when you actually know who you are, but it's gone seconds later.
What does success feel like then?
I don't know. It's a weird one, isn't it? Like saying I am a writer was a big moment. It feels such a pretentious sentence. At least it felt like that for me for so long. And then one day I stopped noticing that it was pretentious and just started saying it. It's like, okay, this must be something's changed in me. I don't know, I guess just feeling like it's your job.
If you get a good review, do you distrust it or think, yes, that's right?
Depends what time of day I read it.
Yes. 1:22.
1:22, and you just think, fine.
I think I distrust it. Generally, you think the writer's an idiot if they think you're good. You're always looking for the bad thing. I mean, that's just inevitable, I can remember the review. It was the last... Why did you have to save it for the last paragraph? Just an offhand comment about sitting. My use of the word sat. He didn't like my slangy use of sat.
No, I don't like that.
You don't like it.
You would have crossed that out in the workshop.
Yeah, in fact, why didn't you correct that? Yeah, and that's stayed with me far more than anything else in that review.
Emma, do you find writing pleasurable?
Yeah, I think so. I definitely don't find it horrible. I have friends who say they absolutely hate it. It's good days and bad days. And sometimes I'm sitting there kind of chortling away to myself, which is sort of embarrassing. I can't write in a library because I tend to kind of I have a feeling that my face is doing things and I'm saying stuff out loud and laughing, even when it's not necessarily funny. So yeah, I think I do enjoy it. But then that's a different thing from it being like hard. There's also like that kind of first moment, that kind of like creating something and it being there and it being real and you're kind of enjoying your characters. That's one thing. And then there's the bit where nothing will fit together and you're literally banging your head against the wall out of frustration. I mean actually like hurting yourself. So yeah, that's less enjoyable, but probably equally necessary, maybe more necessary.
Mm.
But I don't ever have that feeling either that I want to burn something or that I'm a genius. I have always a kind of feeling that I'm like feeling my way. Like here's a little bit, and then here's a little bit more, and that seems to go. Then here's another little bit, and then I have a scene and I like laugh because I've made myself laugh, or I feel satisfied in some way. And then I imagine this one particular reader enjoying it, like she's a made-up person. I think she is a she, but she's a made-up person. I kind of imagine her getting it. That's nice. It's all about communication for me. That's kind of that feeling. And then when you do meet someone who has read something that you wrote and they've got it, that's like proof that my imaginary person exists. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you take your affirmation in a way where you find it. Okay, so you find someone who sort of embodies that imaginary appreciative reader. How do you respond to, I mean, in order to write, you have to maintain a healthy degree of skepticism about your own talent. Not be too complacent or you lose it. Not become too despairing about it or you just won't do it. So you have to sort of believe in yourself and at the same time be a little bit suspicious of your abilities. How do you then cope with the kind of success which has come to you, where there's this unanimity about Elizabeth is missing? How do you treat that success? How do you protect yourself from it?
I don't know. I mean, it's just lovely. I mean, it's really awful because people quite often say, oh, how did you react? And all I ever say is like, it was amazing, amazing, amazing. Oh, it's amazing. And I remember like telling my dad something else had happened. I can't remember what it was. Another foreign right or something like that. You know, another like lovely thing had happened. I'd got an email and it was, you know, like, another yay. And my dad wrote back and said, I run out of superlatives. Like, there's nothing else I can say. Just, you know, great. And so that's wonderful. I think the sad thing is that that's what humans do. They make things normal, don't they? So like, I remember selling to Canada. That was the first territory I sold to. And running out, I was actually working at UEA at the time, and you know, weren't really supposed to just walk out of the office with absolutely nothing to do. I just sort of ran out and called my boyfriend and my mum and my dad. I've sold. And that was wonderful, but I could, no matter what happens after that, you can't ever get quite back to that height. It starts to be more normal, which is really sad because it was all fantastic. So I think it's just that you start to normalise it. And then immediately you're into the next project. That's the next thing, and people are asking you about that, and that brings you right back down to earth. So.
Yeah. I'm going to ask about the next project. And I won't save it for later because we're actually close to the point at which I'll open out the questions to the audience. What are you working on now each? I'll start with Joe. You mentioned writing.
Yes, I'm working on a third novel that I've been working on, I guess, 3 or 4 years, maybe slightly more. It's set in London, which is the first time I've written a novel set in London. The other two were in Swansea. And it's weird, I've lived here for 7, 8 years now. Only really late on did it feel like I could even approach writing about it. It felt so intimidating and multifaceted and full of communities I couldn't speak for and all these things. It just felt impossible to write about. And I think it's not that I've managed to become the person who can write about all those things, but just that I've gained the confidence to write narrowly about London and hope that it speaks more widely.
How close are you to completion?
I have a deadline for the end of this month.
How are you feeling, Joe?
I'm feeling... Well, today was all right, so I'm feeling okay at this current moment. But tomorrow could be bad.
So 122 hasn't arrived?
No, yeah, I'm supposed to be handing it in soon.
Does it have a title that you can share?
Yes, The Adulterants.
What's it about?
Well, you see, if you mishear it, it sounds like it's about the adulterers, which actually also is a little bit about, but it's about innocence and little bits of poison in each of us and that sort of thing.
Naomi, are you writing
Yes.
an historical novel?
A historical novel. It's set between 1922 and 1933, and it's set during the German Bauhaus. So it's set in Weimar, Dessau, and Berlin, and it follows a group of imaginary students with some real people cameos, as I like to do. And it follows this group of students from those 3 different cities, and they're kind of a really close group of university students, and then everything gets kind of torrid, and people have sex with the wrong people, and secrets get kind of overturned, and then the Nazis come.
You gave it away.
Yeah, I hope that wasn't a spoiler. So my tagline right now is it's love, murder, furniture. There's lots of chairs and people looking at chairs in very appreciative ways, and lamps. These are quite Bauhaus lamps, actually. You can see that they're quite kind of Marianne Brandt-ish. So I've done my research trips, which was lots of fun.
Yeah, in Germany.
Yeah.
I didn't know you spoke German.
Oh, I don't. No. You don't need to. There's
don't?
lots of books in English. No. Yeah. I mean, there's tons of books in English. You don't really.
Where's the germ of that book?
The germ.
Yeah.
I went to a Bauhaus exhibition at the Barbican 6 or 7 years ago, and I saw, again, it was an image. I saw all these photographs of these students having a whale of a time, and I just thought, they look fantastic. And they were all, women dressed as men, men dressed as women. They were producing this amazing art and having a great time. But it was all a little bit sanitary. It was all a bit like very clean and great German living. And I thought, what's the kind of poison behind those people? What was the kind of weird engineering going on in the background? So it kind of germinated over the course of writing The Godless Boys and Mrs. Hemmingway.
How far in are you?
Yeah, I'm still quite enthusiastic, and that shows I'm only a third of the way through. I'm sure when I get to 50,000 words, I'll be banging my head against the wall as I say.
Does it have a title?
No.
Okay.
No. I've been playing around with really stupid titles that sound abstract and clever but actually mean nothing. So it's currently called, and this means nothing, 1,000 lamps cannot light the way. I mean, genuinely doesn't mean anything, but I was just like, blah, blah, blah. And I thought it'd be funny to give it a stupid title, so it's definitely not called.
No, I like it.
No, I mean, I think it's because I had that novel in my head of All the Darkness We Cannot See. Mm-hmm. And I was like, ooh, that sold loads of books. And I was like, 1,000 lamps cannot light the way.
That will sell 1,000 books.
Thank you. So I will change, I promise.
Emma, what are you working on?
Oh gosh, well, it's really very new, so I haven't really been talking about it very much. But
You don't have to.
no, that's okay. I feel like I'm past the point where I could scrap it. I've scrapped 3 projects in the last 2 years. And they were all about 30,000 words, and now I'm beyond that, so hopefully it will be okay. But actually, one of the problems I was having was with Maud, the whole idea was that I was looking at dementia from the other side. I've seen it from the outside, not much looking from the inside. So it's kind of, it's sort of looking at the same sort of thing, and I'm looking at teenage depression, which I have seen from the teenager's point of view, but I haven't seen from the mother's. So it's really about a mother who has a teenager with depression, and they go on holiday, and the teenage girl disappears, and she's gone for about 6 days, and they give up all hope. And then she turns up, and she has cuts and bruises, and she's dehydrated and has lost weight, but she's essentially okay. And she absolutely insists that she cannot remember what has happened in the last 6 days, how she went missing or where she's been. And her mother thinks this is a lie. She doesn't know whether she went off to kill herself or was kidnapped or whatever happened, but she is sure that her daughter does remember. And so the rest of the book is her trying to discover what the truth is. Oh, that's a good reaction.
I think that gets the thumbs up.
I'll keep writing it.
What happens to the 2 lots of 30,000 words that you spent the previous 2 years working on?
Gone.
Gone?
Yeah,
Clever.
I mean, maybe I'll cannibalize a bit at some point, but yeah.
So you retain that, and you can recycle some of it.
Yeah, possibly, but it's, I mean, if you think things are in very different voices, or there's, you have like, because it's a particular project or a voice or a person, they are obsessed with one thing, something that's like very specific, their kind of house or whatever it is, and that you can't just transfer that to a new book. It would be really bizarre if they suddenly really liked the house of the character you were writing before. So.
Yeah. Joe actually puts offcuts on your website, don't you? You have bits that didn't make it.
Yeah, I feel too sad to not give them some kind of afterlife, because not necessarily like the rubbish bits, but chapters that I think work but don't fit the structure. Like there was a chapter in Submarine about the bully's house, and I wanted the bully character just to be a kind of voice in the narrator's head. He just keeps referring to him. You don't really meet him in the flesh. And I had this one chapter where you do, and so I wanted to give it some home somewhere. Mm.
But this is a thing now, right? Because when I was, because now it seems like you have to get onto all these different lists when you're being published. You have to go onto like a Waterstones book club list, and a Richard and Judy book club list, and a Sainsbury's book club list. And in order to like do all those deals, your publisher then says, can I have some stuff, and this is true for the US as well, can I have something to put as like a sweetener? So they want you to like write about your inspiration, but usually by the time usually it's your paperback is being published, you've written about the inspiration so many times, like that's not interesting anymore. So I ended up giving, I think it was for the Waterstones edition, I gave them a short story I'd written about a woman with dementia that I'd written when I was 15. I mean, I cleaned it up, obviously, but it starts to be like ridiculous. But they kept asking for deleted scenes. Could we have some deleted scenes to put in the back of the book?
Like, no, I deleted them.
I thought, no, there's a very good reason that's not in the book, because it's too embarrassing. But that's now when I run out of things where I think, oh, I have to cut this and this will have to go. Like there's a little horrible, cynical part of me that goes, but that's all right, that can go in the book club edition. That's terrible. Yeah, awful.
It's turned into a confessional. I've got loads of questions that I'm not going to get to ask now, which did include what do you have for breakfast. But I'll invite questions from the audience. Apparently there is a mic. There are 2 mics. Does anyone have? So there's a hand up straight away, halfway down.
Hi, thank you everyone. Sorry, this question is kind of just for Joe, but I really like Emma and Naomi as well. Joe, how did you find the process of Submarine being turned into a film?
I found it very, very great. It was a really amazing process. I was lucky that I was involved in it. I felt just the right amount. I wasn't the script writer, but I got to be a script editor, so I got to see it in the process of being made. I got to be involved in the casting, which was exciting. And you hear lots of stories about, in fact, I think John le Carré was in the paper the other day talking about how traumatic it's been having all these books turned into films. And there's a quote from him saying, it's like seeing your field of oxen turned into bouillon cubes or something. But the experience was, for me, just pretty much brilliant the whole time. I got to go on set. Weird thing of they set the film partly in Swansea, where I grew up, and I took Richard the director to my actual secondary school, where the book in my head was set. Really bland, comprehensive, no charm. He went to the rival school, the school where the kids were a bit tougher, and we always thought they were going to knife us at lunchtime. And he set the film there, so I had this really weird experience of going to a day's shoot where it was in the school, which I was emotionally terrified of through school, and suddenly walking through the gates, and they'd changed the name to the school in my book, and they were all wearing this uniform they'd specially made, and every uniform had a badge. And as I walked in, they were shooting, in the middle of shooting, a scene that was taken from something that happened to me when I was young. It was just such a strange, ghost-like experience of basically walking in and seeing this playground scene happening with all these kids in uniform. It was really, really amazing and weird. And yeah, I'm really proud of the film. It's quite different to the book, but yeah, I'm glad it happened.
Wasn't the Godless Boys optioned at least?
Yeah, I wrote the screenplay.
You wrote it, and you had lunch with Jude Law.
Yeah, my mate Jude. Yeah, that's still kind of up in the air. Who knows?
It may happen.
I think it's called Development Hell.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth Smithson is going to be on the telly.
Well, there was a Threeputt, so it was commissioned apparently, but I don't know. I feel like it's one of those things you can't really trust. Like, people talk about it, and then even when it moves forward, you think, really? Is that? I don't know. I don't quite trust it's going to happen, and I feel quite weird about it anyway. So, yeah. So we'll see. Okay.
I'm actually distracted as Emma talks because there's a naked man walking backwards and forwards.
He's
just put the light out. Saw me watching him. Is there an... Stop! Look, this.
You can't see him anymore.
Switch the light off. The question at the back, Marisa.
Hello, I just want to know whether you use handwriting or whether you use computers, all of you three.
That was one of my questions.
I like to handwrite for an hour or so, like a scene, 3 pages is my goal. And then I type it up in the afternoon.
I handwrite my poems mostly and type them up if they seem worth typing up. And most of my fiction I do straight to computer.
A mixture. So if I really can't make myself settle, I'll handwrite because it's a bit like tricking yourself. For me it is. I think, well, I'm not really properly writing, so I'll just try it, and then, oh, I've done it. That's always nice.
It is good for the silencing the editorial voice, isn't it?
Yeah. Because you can't move stuff around while you're doing it. But then it's also kind of annoying because you can't do that, and so there's that feeling that you can't move stuff and you can't have that kind of lightness that you have, like that kind of speediness that you have when you're on a computer. And also I do quite often wait for my handwriting to correct itself with autocorrect. I realise that's not going to happen.
That's interesting about the writing poems by hand, but you do the prose fiction on the typewriter. You were on the programme when Michelle Roberts was also one of the tutors, and she told me that she writes poems sitting in bed with paper all around her and writes with a fountain pen when it's poetry. But when it's fiction, she sits at a desk and types
So when
it.
you're a poet, you have to get at least 50% more pretentious than when you were as a novelist.
Or 50% closer to the dream state, half asleep,
I
sort
think
of slumberous mood.
That is slightly right. Yeah, there's something. It just, you're not faced with, when you see the words on the screen, they just don't have, they seem more, I guess, unromantic or something. When you're turning a page or, especially scribbling illegibly, as I like to do, that just feels, you're switching off that judgment voice, which I think is important for poetry.
More so for poetry than for
In my
fiction.
experience.
Yeah. Apparently Hemmingway was one of those people who stood up in order to type.
That's true.
And he did it naked for the dialogue.
No?
Not true.
It's true. I put it in a book.
Why would he need to be naked for the dialogue?
I don't know. I've come across these little autobiographical or biographical gollets about writers, and I collect them. And in my collection, it's got Ernest Hemingway as someone who stands up to type and types dialogue whilst naked. And the other person who stood up was Virginia Woolf. And Henry James and Barbara Cartland used to recline on a chaise longue.
My flat's not big enough for a chaise longue.
So, there you are. Question in the middle, just here.
Hi, this is really addressed to any or all of you. How much of your journey is about self-discovery, and where have you got to?
They've got here.
Silence.
Emma, you can first.
Self-discovery. I mean, I guess there is. So I really struggled with finding this idea for my second novel, and I was talking to a friend who was struggling with her third novel, which is not what I wanted to hear at all. Her third novels were easy. And she said that she thought the difficulty was that every book, you kind of drain something of yourself into the book. Sounds actually slightly gross, but it's like this idea of yourself goes into the book, and then you have to kind of build yourself back up again. And I guess that's kind of a process of knowing who you are and what you're interested in and what else has been going on in your head, where you thought everything was about this first novel, and then you've realised actually you are thinking about other things. They were just kind of sublimated for a bit. So I guess that's kind of self-discovery. Yeah, and so I feel like that only gets you to the next book, though. So, yeah.
But I think there is a sense that it depends on the book, how much of yourself you're discovering. Like, if you've got a research-heavy book, like my second book was much more research-led because it was about communes in Wales, and I've lived in a commune, so I had to do lots of research, and that felt, I think, healthier in lots of ways. I wasn't having to go on this self-discovery thing. I wasn't digging into my own head so much. I was trying in that, as a writer, try and be in other people's heads. But this book I'm writing, I don't think it's self-discovery, but it's certainly self-something. It's much more generating from my immediate experience. I don't find it necessarily that I'm learning great things about myself, but I'm certainly digging into my foibles and my tics and whatever, and playing on them, magnifying them.
Do you leave behind the person who wrote each book? I mean, someone who reads a book, they're having a sort of quasi-experience, like they've gone somewhere. And the books that are really memorable are those that just stay in your mind for, they've become part of your life. But for a writer, you're spending 2, 3, 4 years in a relationship with this imagined world. When you finish the book, do you leave that world behind, or does it become part of you?
I think I can. There are certain maybe characters that I keep a relationship with. It's no longer as destructive and all-consuming as it is when you're in it. But there's characters I feel like I could probably, if I wanted to write a page of them, I could probably do it now. But I think a lot of it fades, and plot probably goes. Like, I got the plot wrong when someone was saying I was like, yeah, is that the bit they're talking to someone about a book I'd written, and they had to correct me on the plot. So I think some things can fade pretty badly, but character maybe not.
It's kind of nice to think that Oliver Tate has a continuing existence, that he's still there. You're carrying him around, perpetually 15 years old.
Yeah, that's true.
Naomi?
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything to say about self-discovery.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know what to say. I think, yeah, your questions bamboozled me. I think I spend a lot of time researching these things, and then I try and not put myself in the book. And I'm not very interested. No, that sounds wrong. I'm not very interested in myself. No, I'm not interested in putting myself in the book. I'm interested in what all the characters are doing. And for me, the self-discovery is like a journey of craft and technique. So, you know, I don't have an agenda with the book. I just want to learn about these characters, and I kind of want to live with them. And for example, with this book, I'm trying to do first person in retrospective. So he's telling the story in hindsight. So for me, I'm learning all these things about how frustrating, vexing the first person voice is, because I've always used close third person. And also the pleasures and all the breadth and colour of a voice in hindsight, where you can skip around in all these brilliant different times. So yeah, it's kind of like a journey of craft more than a journey of self.
Thanks. There was a hand up in the middle near to Marisa.
I was just wondering if you guys had always wanted to be writers, or whether you've ever like fantasized or toyed with the idea of being something else.
That was one of my questions as well.
I'll answer this very quickly, because I was reading an EasyJet magazine. I was coming back from Germany after like quite a torrid research trip with the baby, which is not to be advised. You shouldn't do that. It was a failure. And I was on EasyJet, and I couldn't reach my book because she was asleep on my lap. And I read this article about female pilots, how they really want female pilots, and I just thought that's going to be my job. After 4 books, I think I've got 4 novels, and then I think I'm going to become a female airline pilot for EasyJet. But the slight problem is I have quite a deep fear of flying, so I'm going to have to get over that, and then I'm going to fly to Paris.
You'll be fine once you've learned how
I
to do
think
it.
so, because I'll be in control,
Ah.
and I'll have great banter on the old tannoy.
It has to be easy to.
Well, they're going to fund me. They have this program.
Okay.
So they want to fund defunct female novelists to become pilots. I think they're going to be shit hot excited about my application.
I'll write you a reference.
Thanks.
Joe.
I think I only have teenage cliche career paths that I basically want to be in a band.
You were, weren't you?
I was at UEA in a band. We were called Pixel Face. Pop punk, you wouldn't have heard of us.
I've heard of you. Emma, when did you first decide you wanted to be a writer?
Oh, I think I always wanted to be a writer, and I've been clearing out some stuff from my mum's house recently, and I keep finding little books that I began writing and like made into books, and I tried to read them out to my boyfriend on the phone, and he couldn't understand me because I was laughing so hard, because almost every single one, I think there's maybe one that's got more than a page, but almost all of them, there's a page that I've written on, and then it's just blank pages. So I was obviously more interested in the form of the book, and it's ridiculous. Like it's like something like there was a mouse who went into the field, turned the page nothing. I mean, it's just that constantly. Yeah. So I think I always, luckily, I've learned how to get a little bit beyond that.
But you've always wanted to be a writer from quite a young age.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's like 3, 4, 5. That was. I loved reading, and it seemed like the right thing. And then I stopped telling people I wanted to be a writer, and I think this is on my old biog, but I used to tell people when I was about 12, I said I wanted to be a litigator because it seemed like a grown-up job. I actually had no idea what a litigator did. But if you've ever seen the film Clueless, the dad in that is a litigator. And he seems like a frowny, grown-up person. So I was like, oh, that's the job I'll probably do.
Oh, it's still there.
Frivolous question. Thanks very much. A really interesting discussion, and this is just slightly frivolous, but serious writers that think very clearly and heavily about what they do. What happens when you write an email?
Depends who it's to, I guess. I think I definitely used to worry about my emails to my agent and editor, and whether they'd be judging me. Just getting back to them and say, thanks very much, should I put it in a different way? Yeah, hopefully. I think I've got over that, more or less.
I think I resent emails because if you put anything worthwhile into an email, I feel like that's completely wasted talent. I could have used that for a poem or something, especially if you go as far as to do like a simile or something in an email, and that's really, you've crossed the line then. So I think generally try and be as charmless and cold as you can.
Impossible for you. I kind of find doing emails quite annoying because if you spent the whole day writing, I'm like, oh, can we just talk about this on the phone rather than like have to write out constructed, considerate prose in an email. I also use too many exclamation marks, I think. I just like, everything's fine. It's not fine.
Yeah.
You get annoyed at my use of slang because you said, where have you been? I said, I've been on my hollybobs, which you... So, slangy with too many exclamation marks.
I find it utterly charming.
Fine.
But you all three tweet, don't you? You're tweeters.
You're supposed to be a tweeter when you're a modern writer.
Is that the case?
That's what they tell you. No, I don't know.
This is a question about social media, and
Yeah, I was told I had to be on Twitter.
do you do it because you want to, or
And I
because you
hate
have
it.
to?
Yeah, I find it incredibly stressful. I'd much rather talk to a room of people than tweet something.
I just don't do it anymore. I just can't be bothered. My publicist said, she's now moved to Waterstones, but she said no one's ever sold a book because of a tweet.
Well,
and I was like,
it's true.
okay, fine.
That is the horrible.
But I find it
feeling
quite
behind
useful. Sometimes I'll be like, oh, I'm teaching, I don't know, sci-fi short stories. Has anyone got any recommendations? And then I think you recommended one actually where it's like, oh, look at George Saunders' Escape from Spiderhead. And like loads of people recommended loads of stuff. And I find it quite useful as a teaching aid.
I was doing a little bit of research this morning, and one of your recent tweets was, where shall I stay in Berlin?
Right. I mean, I tweet really interesting stuff like that. It's just like, I have a question, can the world answer it? Rather than, I've got anything interesting to say.
That is, I think that kind of hive mind thing is useful, but so I did an event with Graham Simpson, who wrote the Rosie Project, and in that the main character is kind of like on the Asperger's spectrum, and Bill Gates really loved the book. He thought it was fantastic. So he tweeted about the book, and he had something like 1.2 million followers, and Graham Simpson said that his sales were completely flat. That did nothing to his sales. So this
That's
idea
so interesting.
that someone will pick that up and it will make this huge difference. So now whenever my publishers say, oh, you must tweet, I'm like, you talk to Graham. Like, just you have a conversation with him.
I have like read books that are in my house because I've seen like everybody was tweeting about A Little Life, and there was all these great reviews, and I picked up on it, and it was on my bookshelf, and I was like, oh, that's got great reviews. I'll get. So yeah, maybe I don't know. I don't think it's a necessary obligation to have to do in order to be a writer, I think.
One final question. Next to Jean. One in from Jean. So.
Hi, I was just picking up on that point that, Naomi, you said you were trying to find your genre, but you were sort of talking about being a novelist or a historian. I just wondered how Do you feel, if you've had a very successful novel in a particular type of genre, do you feel that you have the freedom to go out and find different stories and experience them through different genres? You know, would you go from, you know, Mrs. Hemmingway to like an Isaac Asimov space type novel? Do you think you would have the freedom to do that, or do you think that in order to continue to be successful as a writer, you do sort of need to sort of feed people's expectations?
Yeah, when I gave Mrs. Hemmingway to my agent, she was like, it's really different from the Godless Boys, because that is a like speculative fiction set in a made-up place, an alternative history. And now I'm doing something quite similar to Mrs. Hemmingway. I mean, A, because I really enjoy that kind of project. But B, yeah, there is a sense that like, okay, I'm not writing about like dead celebrities' wives, but it's within the same genre. And I think like, yeah, I think my agent was like, is this where you found your feet? And I think it is. I mean, there is, yeah, a degree of pressure to write within that sort of genre, you know, that historical framework. But happily, that's also where my desire sits. Sorry to use that word, Joe. So yeah, it's kind of a happy, a felicitous coincidence, I suppose.
I really fantasized about being an author who would, in that David Mitchell way, produce a book that just seemed utterly different from... Well, actually, now David Mitchell's written a lot of books. You start to see he does have his patterns, but for a while he just seemed like a writer who would never repeat himself and had no... I don't know. I love the idea of being that kind of author, but I think the reality is you could try as hard as you want to... At least I could try my best, and I did try my best to write very, very differently. I tried to write this sci-fi book, but I can only write what I can write, and I end up writing novels that sound like me, I think. So yeah, it's a strange thing. I think if I could choose, I would be a polymath, but I'm a unimath.
It's interesting, when Emma was describing her new novel, that there are themes there which are similar to Elizabeth is missing. Someone goes missing. There's memory loss. Can't remember.
Yeah, it's basically the same book. Yeah, I mean, I think part of the problem with writing my second novel has been that when you write your first novel, it's all exciting and new, and you're discovering how you write, and this is this one project, and then you write your second book, and I had all these ideas. I was going to write something completely different, or at least my language was going to be different, or something was going to be exciting about it, and then you realise you're just you still, like that's. So I was just like, oh, I'm still writing like me. Like you say, it's still me. And there's nothing you can do. So that's partly why I think the second book has been so traumatic, because there's just no getting away from me. But yeah, then there's the things that I'm interested in, and that happens. And I've been trying to run away from it, and can't.
It has to feel necessary. And I think if it's not necessary, if it's confected, then that is tangible for a reader. They can feel the inauthenticity, or conversely, the urgency and necessity of the thing. I think the books that succeed are the necessary ones that you have to write. I think there we must end. And I'll just say, before we conclude, that there is an opportunity to buy books by these authors and get them signed. Downstairs in the same room where the reception was earlier. And I'll conclude by saying thank you very much to Emma, Joe and Naomi. Thank you.